So again, thank you to everyone that is joining today. I'm going to figure out how to turn off transcripting again. I can do that. There we go. That's always disconcerting to see this transcript on the side. But again, thank you everyone that's joined us so far. We appreciate your time and attention to our Indiana District Export Council Lunch and Learn CE Mark update for exporting to the European Union. Again, my name is Mark Cooper, and I'm the Director of the U.S. Department of Commerce, joined by my colleagues Eric Hunt and Scott Lindsay. My colleague Robert Straits, Bob Straits, is our CE Mark specialist and mission to the European Union specialist, and his focus is to assist U.S. companies in questions and gaining the CE mark. So we're delighted to have my friend and colleague Bob Straits here today joining this presentation. And as I mentioned earlier, this event is recorded, and we want to make sure that everyone has access to it on the DEC website after it is completed. Right now, without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Andrew Renke, who is the chairman of the Indiana District Export Council, for a few brief remarks.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome everyone. Appreciate you being here. The Indiana DEC, as Mark mentioned, is a not-for-profit organization created under the auspices of the U.S. Department of Commerce. We're here to offer guidance and help to Indiana companies to help them export. DEC members are volunteer international trade professionals representing the manufacturing, service, academic, and government sectors, all appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce to assist and train small businesses to export. As Mark mentioned, there's at least one district export council in each of the 50 states. Joining us today also on this webinar are a few other members of the Indiana DEC. There's presently about 20 members of the Indiana DEC representing those different sectors that I mentioned. Today, joining us is Raju Chintala from the IEDC and the Indiana-India Business Council, Christine Everett from IU Cyber, Tom Miller, our treasurer for the Indiana DEC, and Mark Hubbs from Amatrol. Thank you, as always, to our collaborative partners, the U.S. Department of Commerce, Mark's office, the SBA, Ex-Im Bank, ISBDC, and IU Cyber, along with the Indy Chamber. This is our second Export Lunch and Learn event for 2022. These webinars are offered every other month beginning in January and running through November. Today's topic deals with an overview and the changes to the CE Mark regulations. CE Mark is often required by the European Union to sell your products there. Our speaker today, as Mark mentioned, is Bob Straits. He's an invaluable resource to the U.S. firms seeking guidance on whether or not they do require the CE mark and what resources are out there to help them efficiently obtain the relevant directive and other CE certifications. He's assisted dozens of Indiana companies during his tenure. Bob is the European Union Specialist for the Office of Western and Northern Europe at the International Trade Administration within the U.S. Department of Commerce and has been covering the CE mark for many years. He covers the EU environmental directives, such as restriction on hazardous substances known as RoHS, energy-related products, ERP, and waste of electrical and electronic equipment, WEEE. Bob has an MBA from Pace University in White Plains, New York. Bob, thank you very much for your time today. With that, I hand the virtual podium over to you.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much, Andy and Mark. I guess, Mark, you're going to help me with the slides.
I'm going to do that right now, Bob. Just give me just a second.
Okay. Yeah, as Andy was saying, the CE mark is, well, I guess everyone in this conference is either exporting to Europe or has an interest in exporting to Europe. So It's important that you know about the CE mark and any of the updates that are currently, coming up or in place. So, yeah, there's the subject we'll be talking about. Let's say also that, this is your hour. So, if you have any questions or even comments, please feel free. I guess they'll be put in the chat box, and I'll be able to, you know, hear what the questions are. But I'll be glad to take questions as we go along, as well as at the end. So I guess we can have the next slide. Um, okay, so as we've known now for many years, the CE mark is the passport to selling in the single market. It's currency, really. It's as valuable as the dollar or the euro when it comes to selling your product in the European market. Okay, next. Next slide. Well, I guess the next slide would be having to do with CE mark legislation and how it's adopted. The commission proposes. Okay, here's the overview then. The single market program calls for freedom of goods, services, people, and capital. That was the foundation of the program when it came into effect in the mid to late 1980s, so that Europe could improve its trade and competitiveness with the U.S. and I guess at that time Japan, now China. The CE mark program is the cornerstone of the freedom of goods part of the single market. It showed that like a machine, for example, had attained a minimum acceptable amount of safety so that it could be traded from one member state to another without having to worry about whether or not somebody's safety standards were so terrible that it might result in a danger. So, that's basically the framework for CE mark. Okay, next, please. Yeah, originally, there were old approach directives. These covered specific sectors like autos, chemicals, and cosmetics. And the directives themselves contained all the technical requirements in them. But the problem was that at that time, you needed a near unanimous approval by all the member states. And that was very hard to get. And so, it just wasn't working that well as far as creating a single market. So then, in the late 80s, they moved to have majority voting, among the Council of Ministers rather than near unanimous. And that speeded up things, along with the fact that they started designing the directives in a different way. They designed the directives to take a horizontal approach so that, for example, a machine directive would cover all the different types of machines, rather than, say, developing a directive for agricultural machines and, this type of thing, separate types of machines. So once they started doing that, things moved along pretty well. And the directives are all inclusive, as I mentioned, in other words, the machine directive covering all the types of machines, the electrical directives covering all electronic products. And, it just lends itself to the forming of a single market. Okay, next. So directives are laws, and directives and regulations make up the core of the CE mark program. I think there's now about 25 or 26 CE mark directives, if you include the environmental directives, which are CE mark directives. These directives and regulations are proposed by the Commission, amended by the Parliament, and approved by the Council of Ministers. So that's kind of the legislative process. It takes maybe 2 years from the time the Commission proposes a directive until it's amended and finally approved. U.S.
Hey, Bob.
companies have input into this system through both the Parliament and the Commission. We might talk about that a little bit later on, is when we talk about the revision of the machine directive. Okay,
Hey,
next.
Bob, I have a
Yes.
question.
Sure.
So I don't know if you're going to cover this, but I get a lot of questions about, okay, you told me there's directives. Where do I get them? Are you going to talk about that later?
Where we get the directives?
Right, because people say, do I have to buy them? Are they free? How, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, the directives you can get online. Directives don't cost anything. What does cost, though, are the standards. Okay, that's a different story. The standards are crucial, in particular complying with the EMC and low voltage directive, and those are not free. They were copyrighted, and so you have to go to an outlet to get them.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
okay. I guess next slide. Yeah, the directives are the legal basis for the requirements, but the standards supply the technical information for meeting the CE mark requirements. I saw something on the chat, but yeah, if this was something about voluntary standards, yeah, theoretically, the standards are voluntary, but de facto, the standards are mandatory when it comes to, in particular, the EMC and low voltage directive. Because the problem is, I mean, I'm going off a little bit off track here, but I thought I saw that question. The problem is when the Europeans go to enforce something, like let's say they're going to enforce a shipment of computers that comes in or something like that, where there's electronics involved in the EMC and low voltage directive. How are they going to enforce it? They're going to benchmark it or compare it against their standards. That's how they do it. So, that's why we tell people that for the electronic equipment, they have to use European standards. Now, machinery is different. Machinery, you don't have to use the European standards. You can use US standards, US tests and designs as well, as long as you meet the requirements of the machine directive. All right, so that's kind of off the beaten track, answering that question, but it's an important question. So getting back to the legislative input here, yeah, US companies have a much better chance of commenting on the development of the directives than they do shaping the standards, because the Europeans basically have closed off their standards organizations, CEN and CENELEC, to non-EU companies. And if you are a non-EU company with a manufacturing presence in Europe, then you're probably going to be able to comment on their standards. But as far as a U.S. exporter, no. So next slide, please. Yeah, these are the European standards organizations. CEN for machinery and medical and pressure equipment, personal protective equipment, CENELEC for the electrical products, falling under EMC, low voltage, medical, electrical, and IDEC, European Telecommunications Standards Institute, mostly with radio equipment directive products. Okay. Next, please. Well, these are a list of about half of the directives, but I tried to pick out the ones that probably affected U.S. exporters most often. The machine directive would be right at the top. The low voltage and EMC directive would be probably next, as far as you know, the standards that exporters need to, or the directives that exporters need to know about. And of course, keep in mind that the directives are the legal basis for the rule. In other words, the low voltage directive is going to say, well, the product has to be safe, it can't electrocute you, and it can't catch on fire. But there's no specific details about that. That's where the standards come in. The standards provide the details of what you have to do for, you know, a particular product. If you have a machine, then you have to use a particular low voltage, standard for that machine. The same with the electromagnetic compatibility, same thing. You have to match up the standard to the product. And, you know, most exporters aren't in the business of doing this. That's why they have to go to a lab. Okay, so for those two directives in particular. Okay, I guess, you know, you see the list there. I mean, there were quite a few people in this that seemed to me were involved with medical devices. There were one or two that might have been involved in pressure equipment. Quite a few that may have been involved in the electromagnetic and low voltage. Okay, next, please. All right, so these are the terms that we're going to talk about today that you need to know for CE marking: the technical file, risk assessment report, conformity assessment, EU standards, declaration of conformity, and EU enforcement surveillance. Okay, next,
Bob?
please. Yeah.
I've got a question as you go through. You mentioned that you listed the key EU directives. How many directives are there? Or is that a?
Well, there's about, you know, I mean, you know, there's about 23, but then you need to tack on ones for the environment, you know, like the RoHS,
Okay.
restriction of hazardous substance, and the energy related products. Those are also CE mark directives. So, you know, there's 23 base directives. Then there's a couple of environment ones, but the problem with the energy products one is that there's many different regulations as an offshoot to that. And, you know, there's energy related products for computers, for washing machines, for, you know, dryers, dishwashers, you know, on and on. There's about 30 of those directives for energy related products. So,
Okay.
I mean, technically those are all CE marks. So, you know, if you count them, then there's probably 50 or so, but
Okay,
we don't
thanks.
really, yeah. So, okay. So, okay, next slide, please. Yeah, okay, technical file. This is really kind of what you're living out of for a while. This is the document that shows that your product meets the requirements of the directive. That includes the risk assessment report, which would be on top. I'll go into the risk assessment a little bit later, but that's the first part of your technical file. Maybe the first part is a justification of why you pick this directive. That might be the very first thing, and then the risk assessment. The technical file has to cover the design, manufacture, and operation of the product, and will include test reports and certificates. And technical file has to be written in one of the official community languages, and English is one of the official languages, so we're okay there. But the operating instructions have to be in the language of the user. So, you know, if it's going to, if your machine or whatever product it is going to, you know, France or Italy, then it has to be, the operating instructions have to be in French or Italian, depending on which one of those countries. And the technical file has to be available for 10 years after the machine has been put on the market. Okay, next. So the technical file is important because this is the document that you'll be showing if European enforcement authorities come around and have questions on your product. They might say, well, you know, we have a question on this machine. You know, we think it's interfering with, you know, a radio station nearby or television station. Can you show us, you know, how it is that you complied with the directive? So you want to be able to, I'm not saying this will happen, but this is just a hypothetical. You know, you want to be able to pull the technical file out and show, well, you know, we met the low voltage directive and we met the EMC directive, and here's our test result, and this is the standard we used. And, you know, as far as the technical safety of the machine, we performed such and such a test on this and that. And, you know, so you want to make sure that everything is accurate and thorough. As far as authorized rep, you know, and as you people who are doing medical devices know, you have to have an authorized rep, and you're supposed to have a European rep for the machinery. Now, there's a difference. The authorized rep is a more elaborate thing. It's a legal presence. The European rep for machinery is really just a contact point for enforcement. Okay. But then nonetheless, those names should be included in the technical file. Okay, next. Yeah, the risk assessment report is very important for these directives, for the machine directive and the medical device directive in particular. The machine directive, the risk assessment is described at the beginning of Annex 1, and I believe it is in the new medical device directive as well. Basically, it comes down to this. They want to know, well, what are the hazards of your product? What is the probability of those hazards occurring? And how did you eliminate those hazards? Or if you couldn't eliminate them, how did you reduce them and warn the operator of residual risks? So that's basically what it comes down to. But you know, for the medical device, you have to use the standard risk assessment standard 14971. For the machine directive, I recommend that you use the standard 12,100. I think we'll show that a little bit later, but you know, it's that important that you might want, you know, to get the guidance of how that is in a standard. I mean, if you feel confident in it, yeah, okay.
Just a question about this, because I don't know much about the risk assessment report. Is this something that a normal person can do on their own? Can I write that? How do I know how to do it? Or do I hire someone to help me write that risk assessment report as a part of the technical file? How do I do that?
Well, for the medical device, you're going to hire somebody.
Okay.
Because that standard is pretty complicated. It's pretty involved. Okay. For the machine directive, you might be able to do it, but depending on how technical you get into it, you know, you know, if you really get technical about it, you probably would also want to hire somebody. You know, I can say is that for medical device, almost guaranteed you're going to have to hire somebody. Okay, because it's a pretty long thing. Machine directive, you might be able to do it, but you know, I would look at that standard and see what's involved. You know, if you just go by the directive, you probably could do it. The annex, you know. So, you know, it's a tough question. Not for the medical device part, but more for the machine. Okay, so I don't know what to say. You know, look at the annex, order the standard, and see if it's something that you can do on your own. If it isn't, well, then you'd have to hire a consultant.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
Okay, all right. Okay, next. Next one. Okay, we talked about if you couldn't eliminate all the risks of the machine and you had to notify the operators of the residual risk, warning signs and guards are a way to offset the residual risk. And then this is just what I talked about with Mark a few seconds ago. The risk assessment standard for machinery is that listed there, and for the medical device, it's 14971. Yeah, one other little thing is that these standards get updated. So you have to, when you call to order, always make sure you're asking for the most recent one. Because you see that 14971 was recently updated. 12,100, I think, is still 2010, but it's certainly due for an update. Okay, next. Okay, conformity assessment. Conformity assessment is kind of a fancy way of saying, well, how did I meet the requirements of the directive? And so the first thing is you have to know which directive covers your product. And then within the directive, there's a section on conformity assessment, and that's what you would look for. Now, some directives, like the machine directive, do allow for self-certification as long as you meet the essential health and safety requirements in Annex 1. So this would be called internal production control. Next one, please. Other products, such as Class 2 or 3 medical devices, certain kinds of personal protective equipment, or pressure equipment, must be certified and approved by a notified body in Europe because these products are seen as too risky. So this is when you have to, as I said in the notes here, have to go to a notified body to get approval. And the notified body is going to, yeah, okay, I'll answer that question in a second. I saw in the chat. Okay, yeah, the notified body is going to take a particular example of your product and assess it, and then hopefully certify it. And if not, they'll get back to you and tell you what needs to be done. Hopefully, maybe they can help you with what needs to be done. But anyway, since you're sending them an example or a type, it's called type approval module. There are, by the way, Annex 4 of the machine directive is very important to look at. Those are dangerous machines. So not all machinery can be self-certified, but about 90 to 95% can be. But Annex 4 has a list of about 20 or 22 machines that can't be self-certified, that have to be approved. Most of those involve saws and blades, that type of machine. Okay. So there are labs in the U.S. that you can subcontract with, and you know, so that the testing can be done in the U.S. for some of these higher risk products. You don't have to go to Europe. Next slide. Yeah. Okay. Before I touch on this slide, the question I think I got was, can you know, if the standards change and the directives change, are the products that are already in Europe grandfathered in? The answer is yes. Okay, so if you sold a product, you know, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, and the machine directive gets, the new machine directive gets, well, let's look at a medical device. If you sold a medical device in Europe 6 years ago, and now we have this new medical device directive, you know, your product is grandfathered in. And the same with machinery. If there's a new machine directive coming out next year or the year after, which there probably will be, you don't, you know, you're grandfathered in. But if you're shipping anything new out to Europe, that's when you have to change your designs and get retested to meet the new standards. Okay, so anyway, use of European standards. We've touched on this. Okay, manufacturers, the Europeans say that use of standards is voluntary. But, you know, de facto, they have to use European standards for the EMC and low voltage directive and need to confirm these standards with a test result from a lab. The lab does not have to be affiliated with a notified body, but has to be accredited. So, you know, let's say that you have a dangerous machine or a dangerous pressure equipment or a piece of pressure or a medical device. Yeah, those do have to be certified by a notified body. Okay. But a product that's being tested for European standards, particularly electrical and electronic, do not need notified body. They can be done by a lab. Yeah, when I say medical device directive, yeah, you're right. I'm referring to the new medical device regulation. Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. SME's top complaint about the CE Mark program over the years has been the expense associated with these tests. Okay, next. Now, sometimes, I don't know, you know, the states have some funds, I don't know if Indiana does, where they can defray the costs up to maybe $5,000 of a lab test. I don't know, you know, what the situation is with the state of Indiana, but there are, you know, several states that have that arrangement. Okay, so apparently it is available in Indiana, called InStep program, and it does cover the costs, somewhat of the costs. Okay. Okay, as I mentioned before, manufacturers do not have to use the EU standards to meet the requirements of the machine directive. They just have to meet the requirements of Annex 1 of the directive, the essential health and safety requirements. And then I mentioned before about Annex 4 machines. Okay, next. Okay, so now you've done everything. Let's see, will all products be grandfathered in until Form? I didn't quite catch that last question. It escaped, it came off the screen too quickly. Question was, will all products be grandfathered in? And then there was some more to it that I didn't see.
Bob, I can read it to you. Will
Yeah.
all products be grandfathered in until a form, fit, or function change occurs, or will the next shipment be subject to the updated requirements? I would imagine the latter.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's say let's say that low voltage direct, you know, you have some product that involves that you plug in the wall and it's electrical. Well, let's just say it's I don't know, a computer. Okay, I can always fall back on that. But so if that product went in before the updates of the low voltage and EMC directive, it was fine. And then it can stay in after those updates. Those updates went in 2014. But anything being shipped after that has to comply with the new directive. And this is where you have to keep up to date on standards, because I've had more than one person tell me that their product was stopped in customs. They would say, well, you know, I don't know, I don't understand. We did the CE Mark 20 years ago, and now they're telling me the product is stopped in customs and it can't go through. Well, that's because the standards changed. They were actually lucky that they were able to get away with it that long. The standards had changed probably twice. The directive had changed once. And so you have to keep up to date on these new standards. And when, Usually they give you about, from the time a standard is announced, they might give you 2 years. And then after that time, you have to have tested for that standard and shown in your technical file that you complied with it. Otherwise, I might be getting a call from your customs broker with the same problem. Okay, what was that last question that came across? I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
It's if, let's see, if you're exporting a common piece of machinery, this machinery most likely has gone through the approvals. Do all exporters have to go through this, or is there a shared CE marking? If so, where do you find this information?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Read it again.
Sure. And you can, Bob, on the meeting chat, you can use your cursor to expand the chats and to show more or less of that specific question. But the question is this: if you're exporting a common piece of machinery, this machinery most likely has gone through the approvals. Do all exporters have to go through this, or is there a shared CE marking? I can see what they're saying. They're saying if a motor has gotten through and you by another company, and your company's making two different motors, is there a shared CE mark?
I'm not exactly sure what the point is, but and what they're driving at. But look, each product has to meet CE marking. Now, if he's talking about, making a series of machinery, then you're testing to one machine and that gets the CE mark, and then you set up a quality control program so that that the future machines coming off that assembly line will meet the CE mark requirements. Okay, that's how it's done for that type of thing. I don't know if that answered the question.
I think if they're saying as an example, if a company in the town over is exporting a wood saw or a machine, a wood saw or some kind of motor, and your company makes the same type of motor, the other company has gotten the CE mark, you would still have to get the CE mark, would you not?
Yeah,
Okay.
you would.
Let's keep going on this. Let me try to clarify this for everybody. Okay, the idea is that there is no blanket CE mark. So if you have a widget that has a CE mark on it, and you say, hey, someone got a CE mark on that widget, does that qualify for every one of these widgets, every one of these motors? No. Each individual exporter, when they sell something in the European Union, you have to specify and meet the standard. It's not like if Joe has a similar product like you had, well, his got in with a CE mark, mine's just like Joe's, so that works. No, it doesn't. You have to make sure that your product qualifies at a time. You can't say mine's just close enough like his. No, yours has to meet the standard.
Right.
Once you've met the standard, and like Bob says, you can make a production run of the similar stuff that you already shipped, but you can't say mine's like that other one. There's no blanket wide CE mark for anything.
Okay. All right, thanks. Okay, so now after you've done all this work, put together the technical file and met the requirements of the directive and gotten test results and used the standards, the appropriate standards, and done the risk assessment report, then it's time to, fill out the declaration of conformity and begin about thinking of shipping your product to Europe. So the declaration of conformity accompanies each product, and it tells customs in Europe that this product has met the CE mark and to let it through for access to the single market. The CE mark must be affixed near the nameplate of the manufacturer and must be at least 5 millimeters in height. The name of the importer is also supposed to be on the product packaging or the declaration of conformity. Now, I know that that's kind of a hard thing to imagine, but perhaps the importer can put their name on when they receive the product. But the importer's name is supposed to be on because that is giving the Europeans some kind of a local or Europe-wide contact. Okay, next.
Hey, Bob, let me mention something real quick because this happens all the time. People call us up and say, hey, Mark, what does the CE mark look like? Does it have to look a certain way? You saw at the very beginning, Bob had a picture of the CE, and it has to more or less look like that and be at that size. So there's no one standard of it. It's just like a CE mark, and it looks sort of like what you'd see in a picture, but there's no, trademark CE picture that you have to use. Because I get that question too.
Okay, thanks. Okay, next. All right, so the sample declaration would be, you could put this on company stationery, the manufacturer in the upper left-hand corner, and the address and contact information, and then what's the product, in this case, printing press, a little bit of information on that, the model number, the serial number. Then next. Yeah, this is imagine that this is all one page. Okay, I put in the three slides is one page. On the same page, you're putting in the undersigned declares on behalf of Jones Printing Press of Garden City, New York, that this above product meets the requirements of the Safe Machine Directive and the Electromagnetic Compatibility Directive. In this case, the low voltage requirement was put under the machine directive, which often is done. But you list the standards, okay, and that's where the low voltage requirement is seen. 60204 is a low voltage standard. Risk assessment report was done, and then the two EMC, immunity and emissions. Okay, next.
Bob, one more thing. So just for people on the call, but that don't know, you often have to comply with more than one directive. You notice what Bob did here is like when you say I have to comply to get a CE mark, you may oftentimes have to comply with multiple directives because your stuff has more than one directive that is applicable to it. And then you have these standards underneath it that you have to use to meet the directive compliance. I just want to clarify that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mark. Okay, next. And finally, the bottom part of the page, the technical file is kept at this address in Garden City, and then you need to sign it to back your claim that you met CE mark requirements. Now, the one thing that I didn't put in here that, if this is a machine, then you're supposed to have the name of your European representative. Now, that could, this is another extra expense that's being put on exporters to the European market because, if you're making something in Europe, you don't have to have a European representative because the manufacturer's address is in Europe. So, but, you can use your distributor as your European representative, and put their name on the bottom of this declaration of conformity, or you could use the manufacturer if you're only shipping to maybe one or two people. If you have that kind of a product, you could maybe use them. But you are supposed to have a European representative so that the Europeans can more easily enforce and surveil products coming in from the outside. Okay, next. Okay, market surveillance. Well, for about the first 12 or so years of the CE mark program, everything was in place really except for market surveillance. There was no provision in any of the directives calling for market surveillance. And so that was kind of a loophole in the whole thing. So then in 2008, about 13 years after the program started, they decided, well, we have to strengthen market surveillance. This is, okay. Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Yeah, post-market surveillance has to do with the medical device more than anything. We'll talk about that a little later, but yeah, this so the market surveillance has tightened up considerably since 2008. This is where you do have, people in European enforcement agencies going out and randomly inspecting products, or you have customs officials who are much more familiar with the directives and even the standards that apply that might be outdated and this and that. So, so it's important now that people really meet the requirements. And also the other thing that they did was all the directives always referred to the manufacturer of this, the manufacturer of that. So the thought was, well, are the Europeans going to come after me and I don't know, New Jersey or Connecticut? So what they did was they made the manufacturer, the importer, and the distributor responsible for CE mark compliance. Now, this happened a lot. A lot of people called me and said, my distributor says I have a wonderful product, but he says that I need the CE mark. See, he knows that the distributor is going to be on the line. The distributor knows that he's going to be on the line, and he could be actually, in a sense, prosecuted if the product doesn't comply. So they made different points of the supply chain responsible. Okay, next. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are two pieces of legislation to this new legislative framework that concentrated on market surveillance. One was 2008-765, which is about market surveillance and accreditation. It instructed the member states to set up market surveillance agencies and set up a single accreditation body in each member state to accredit notified bodies. And then the other one was 2008-765, which confirmed the principles of the CE mark program and said basically that, we're committed to doing it this way. Okay, next. Okay, so now we have yet another, well, this is tied into what I said about having to have a European representative. So most recently, and this was passed in 2019, but just came into effect last year, is the market surveillance and compliance regulation, which basically what it's saying is that, okay, we know that we set up an where you have to have an authorized rep for the medical device directive, and we know that we set up a European representative for the machine directive because those are in the directives. Now, anything that's CE marked has to have a European representative. Okay, as far as exporters are concerned. Okay, so if you're covered by the Personal Protective Equipment Directive or the Pressure Equipment Directive, now you have to have listed at the bottom of the declaration a European representative. Okay, this is relatively new. And again, it has to do with enforcement. So, what they're saying is, I don't want to get too much involved in this because, I don't want to cringe on the time. I want to go over that medical device thing that we have. They're saying that any company doing business in Europe is represented by a manufacturer, an importer, an authorized rep, or a fulfillment center. Now, if you're an exporter, well, you're not the manufacturer and you're not the importer, but you could use your distributor once again. if you're, you know, needing to list a European representative, or you could hire an authorized rep. And a fulfillment center has to do with e-commerce, e-commerce selling to Amazon for distribution. Amazon is apparently offering to provide this service to people doing e-commerce. Okay, next, please. Yeah, okay, I explained that. Okay, next. These are some CE mark issues that we want to go over, near the end of the CE mark program. Is the manufacturer is the person whose name appears on the product. The person putting his or her brand name or label on a final assembled product is the manufacturer and is responsible for meeting CE mark requirements. Does this mean that I didn't get that one, I'm sorry. Does this mean I cannot sell directly to a customer in Europe? No, I just meant that if you were selling by e-commerce, you're selling, it has to be stored in an Amazon warehouse, and they would, or if it's being stored in an Amazon warehouse, then they'll be your European representative. I don't know if that answered that question, but
The idea is for folks on the line is somebody in Europe, they really want responsible if there's a problem.
exactly.
So it's got to be somebody. It's got to be you. It's got to be your rep. It's got to be a warehouse. They've got to be able to talk to somebody in the European Union that can fix the problem or report back on it.
Yeah. See, they had that system for medical devices and for machinery. Now they want that system for all the CE mark directives, which they didn't have before. Pressure equipment, even toys, so on and so forth. Personal protective equipment, everything. So when subcontracting takes place, such as if somebody in China is making your product for you, if your name is on the product, you're still responsible for the CE mark requirements. So if somebody in China is making the product, then you're going to have to be in touch with them to make sure that they're doing the CE mark correctly, because usually the CE mark has to be done at the point of manufacture. So it goes to the rule, who's responsible? The person whose name is on the product is responsible, no matter where the product is made. Sometimes people call and say, well, I didn't make the product. Somebody else made it. Oh, too bad. Your name is on it. What was that one again? Can we hold off on the technical file or something? Sorry, I didn't.
They ask, can we hold the technical file ourselves, or must we have a third party like the rep hold it for 10 years?
Well, you can hold it yourself. It has to be easily accessible to the rep, such as there's an agreement that, if the rep gets contacted by EU surveillance authorities, that you'll be able to FedEx the technical file in, 72 hours, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
But you don't need to have the rep keep the technical file and, be familiar with all your trade secrets and all that.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, yeah, okay. And then European standards, yeah, I've mentioned this, we've mentioned this. Standards change, please keep up to date with them. Components, as a rule, by themselves don't need the CE mark, but do need to be assessed as part of a complete unit for CE mark requirements. Okay, next. Okay, here's the new machine directive being formulated. I'd say it's going to be adopted within a year, but even though it could be within a year, there would be another 2 years of grace time before that's becomes effective, so there'll be plenty of time for people to know about this. You can put your technical file in electronic format. It expands the list of dangerous machines by dealing with artificial intelligence and software. And a lot of companies are not really happy with that. They don't know how this is going to be defined. So right now, USTR and Commerce are involved in talking with the European Union about this and trying to get examples of what they have in mind. Because of course, you know, that would add an awful lot of expense to companies. If a lot of companies say, well, we've been using artificial intelligence for years, you know, and now all of a sudden we have to take it to a notified body for approval. That's way too much money. So we're trying to get from the European Union examples of what they have in mind. Okay, next. These are just a review of the steps of getting the CE mark, identify the directives, assess the product according to essential requirements, use the appropriate standards when needed, get the test results, prepare the technical file to include all that information, and then the administrative part, prepare the declaration of conformity and affix CE marking and ship to Europe. Okay, next. These are just links you can have that would help you. That this is where you can find the list of standards, and you can find the complete directive and a list of standards, but it won't be it'll only be the list of standards. It won't be the actual content. Okay, and the list of labs you can find on the other link. Okay, I want to go over the medical device. I don't want to go over time too much, but since I saw that there were some companies that make medical device, this is just of course, a brief overview. You know, the first thing is your product covered by the medical device regulation? Okay, that's one thing. Determine the product classification in Annex 8. This will tell you how your product is classified. Then determine the conformity assessment procedure, which will depend on the product classification. So now you'll know, well, am I a class 1 product that I can self-certify for, or am I a class 2 or 3, which is going to require notified body approval? So that information would be in Annex 8. Then the risk assessment, which I talked about, that Mark asked me about. Yeah, I'm afraid that's pretty complicated. And, I mean, you can look at that standard, but an awful lot is asked. And, you're either going to need a consultant or you're going to need staff that knows how to do that. Okay, clinical investigation. This is a slight difference from the old directive that didn't require this. That required a clinical evaluation, but this is a thorough investigation. They want to see evidence of that. Then Annex 1 requirements, similar to the old directive, having to do with the design and manufacture of the product, addresses physical, chemical, biological properties, and also talks about labeling and instructions. Line up a notified body if your product is class 1, 2, or 1 or 2, or class 1 measuring or sterility. And this is the problem now that people have. We were talking about this the other day with Eric and Mark. There aren't enough notified bodies now because the Europeans did not create enough notified bodies when they put in this new regulation. And so companies are having problems finding notified bodies. A lot of companies who were already in the market got to extend their test results and test certificates to 2024. So it's fine for them. But if you're new to the market and you're a class 2 or 3 product, then it's difficult to find notified body. So, We've been in contact with the European Union about this, and so this remains an issue. Okay, put together a quality control program. This is also along the lines of risk assessment. Not an easy thing to do. Information on technical documentation is explained in Annex 3. This is what needs to be put in your technical file. Post-market surveillance program is also described. Here you'll be working with your authorized rep. Are there any problems with the product? What needs to be done to improve the product, after it's been put on the market? Then hire an authorized rep. This is a requirement. Their responsibility is to register the device in the EU and to enter information in the UTMED database. And then manufacturer affixes CE mark and fills out declaration of conformity. Okay, I know that's kind of a 30,000-foot overview, but I wanted to at least get that in. Okay, I'm not sure what, okay, I think for all intents and purposes, I don't want to go too much over time. This is a directive that covers CE mark. This is a directive that covers products that are not covered by the CE mark where safety is an issue, like gymnastics equipment, certain kinds of furniture, infant car seats, and rollerblades. There's no CE mark product for them, and yet safety is an issue. So this is where you would lump those products under. Generally, you can self-certify for this directive. Okay, next. Yeah, I think I'm gonna, if it's all right, I'm gonna kind of sum up the directives, or I mean, it's up to you. If you have 10 minutes extra, we can do this. If not, I can just say that we've got the restriction of hazardous substance directive, which anyone that makes electronics knows about. It involves all electrical and electronic equipment.
Bob,
And yeah,
I would like to keep going for another 10 minutes. Typically, we've done that in the past.
okay,
For
okay,
for those people listening in, and you have to leave us, please know that we're going to be posting uh, this webinar on the Indiana District Export Council website, both in the training section and on our past events section. So you'll be able to have access to this on our website, indianadec.org. So if you could just go ahead and finish the
yeah, okay.
directives, I think this is great information.
Okay, so we got the restriction of hazardous substance, the energy-related products, and the waste of electrical and electronic equipment. Those are basically the three main ones. The one that I'm not really qualified to talk about is REACH, which I know is big, but that's, I can tell you that the Ross directive is also under review, and so is the REACH regulation. Those two are under review. So that's going to be, big happenings for 2022. I'm not sure when the final, product is going to go into effect, but it's just something to be aware of. Okay, next. Yeah, the Ross directive applies to electrical and electronic equipment, restricts the use of 10 substances, including lead, mercury, cadmium, hexavalent chromium, 2 flame retardants, PBDE and PBB, and then I don't know the initials of those 4 phthalates. I have them here, but so there's 10 substances that you have to, if you're making an electrical product, you've got to go to your supplier and make sure that everything that they're selling you complies with the Ross directive and only has a restricted amount of these 10 substances. So that's how Ross is done. The end user, the final assembler has to go back in the supply chain and make sure that everything that he's been sold, all the components and materials comply with this directive and that the supplier has the proof of that. Okay, next. Okay, I kind of explained this slide in what I just said. Yeah, so Ross was mentioned before is a CE mark directive. The manufacturer has to compile a technical file. You have to compile a technical file for each CE mark directive that you are covered by. Ross directive needs to be listed on the Declaration of Conformity as well. And the Ross directive is being enforced, so companies, please make sure that you comply. Okay, they take apart products and test, and usually they're cooperative with the manufacturer, telling them that it doesn't pass and this is what you have to do to pass. But why even be in that position anyway? Okay, next. Energy related products. This is a series of directives that apply to specific products. You'll see a list at the end of this next slide, but they're asking for energy efficiency for washing machines and dryers and different types of products.
Webinar.
Yeah.
Oh, that's all?
Yeah, we can talk.
So
House
this is a way.
available on First Street just came up 1.1 million.
Folks,
Well,
make sure
look
you've
at-
muted your
When
mic
can we
there
go
real
look
quick
at?
for everybody.
Yeah. So anyway, in some cases, these energy related products do call for efficiency in other resources such as water in a washing machine. But mostly it's about energy efficiency. Okay, next. And these are the examples. So if you're making anything like this, if you're making any products that are listed here, then you have to be aware of that energy related product list. And, you get the regulation and match it up against what you've manufactured the product to. And one thing that's good about energy products is that all the requirements are listed in the directive. So you don't have to do standards. You don't have to, there's no standards involved, and there's really no testing involved. You can self-certify as long as you meet the requirements of the energy efficiency. Okay, next. I think I explained that. Okay. Yeah, the Ross directive applies horizontally to all electrical and electronic equipment, whereas the energy related product is aimed specifically at specific products. Okay, next. And then finally, the waste of electrical and electronic equipment. If you're making an electronic device or piece of equipment, this is the European Union's mandatory recycling program, and you have to affix this insignia on the product. You would affix it near the CE mark, and it just tells people that this electronic product cannot be thrown out in the trash. It has to be recycled. Now, usually the European customer takes care of the waste of electrical and electronic equipment requirements. And those requirements involve registration, reporting, and lining up a recycler. The WE is not a CE mark directive, so you don't have to list the WE directive on here, but you should put the label on, and I guess that's about it for that one. So in wrapping up, these are the points that we've kind of been alluding to during the conversation here. About half of U.S. exports to Europe are covered by the CE mark. I went through the list of quite a few of the companies and here and today, and they seem to be mostly covered by CE marking. Cost of lab results for EMC and low voltage are the biggest drawbacks for SMEs. But the CE mark does allow access to a lucrative market of 500 million people. And then, as we've been talking, please be aware of changes in exporting, such as the machine directive, RoHS directive, and standards. Now, if you have any questions or you need information on CE marking, please give me a call. And I think that's about it. So I appreciate everyone staying with it.
Bob,
Thank you.
we did have
Yes.
one question with regards to Brexit. And for those listening in, Great Britain broke off from the European Union. And the question was, with the development and implementation of the UK's equivalent, the UKCA, will there be major differences, or will the two certification processes align?
Yeah, well, there's a story on Britain. Of course, it's very important because I think that, Britain used to be our top export market in Europe, not overall, of course, but in Europe it was. Now I think they're pretty much tied with Germany. So as far as Brexit, the regulations were supposed to go into effect this year, but there was a lot of kind of, I guess, unhappiness or whatever in British industry. So it's been extended another year. So, for this year, for the rest of the year, they'll accept CE mark. So U.S. exporters don't have to do anything different. Now, next year is kind of a different story. You're supposed to affix the UKCA mark. The requirements are the same, but not in every case, though. I mean, for example, if you made a medical device and you got that certified in the EU for the CE mark, that would not be recognized in the UK. You'd have to get that same medical device certified in the UK with the UKCA mark. Now, that's an obvious redundancy to us. That's part of the Brexit. That's kind of the way it ended up. Now, I know that some major company trade associations are very unhappy with this, and they're trying to get it so that the CE mark would be accepted. Maybe cosmetically you could put UKCA mark, but the double testing would not have to happen. They've already seen a drop off in trade between Europe and the EU. And so a lot of industry groups are not happy with this. But for now, for this year, U.S. companies won't have to worry. It's just business as usual. Okay. All right. I think that's about it.
Well, we want to say thank you, Bob, and thanks to everyone that stuck with us. I know it's a involved topic. There's a lot more. We could probably have another couple hours because the content is rich. But we appreciate everyone being here on the call today. This meeting, it has been recorded. We appreciate your time. Andy, any final comments on behalf of the deck?
No, Mark, I just want to relay to Bob my thanks for his participation. It's a fantastic webinar. I do want to remind folks that we have another export webinar coming up in May, July, September, and October. We'll be posting these. These include Women in International Business, one on Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and anti-boycott provisions, and also doing a deep dive into export opportunities with India. We're also doing a half-day in-person doing business in Africa seminar at the Hotel Carmichael in Carmel in October 20th. Again, thank you, Bob. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time, and have a great day. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.